I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would share her wedding story with the whole world, but here I am. My name is Annie. I'm 28 years old, and I need to tell you about the day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life. I want to speak to you directly, as if we were sitting together over coffee, because this isn't just a wedding story. It's about family, betrayal, and the kind of truth that only comes out when emotions are stretched to their limit. When I walked down the aisle, I thought the only thing I needed to focus on was my husband waiting for me. His smile, his eyes, his trembling hands holding back tears, that was supposed to be my memory. But behind me, there was a shadow, one that would stain the day forever. That shadow was my own sister, walking into my wedding in a dress she never should have worn. I want you to imagine the shock. Guests gasping, whispers spreading like fire, cameras flashing as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. It wasn't a pale pastel. It wasn't cream. It was pure, dazzling white. A wedding dress, at my wedding, worn by someone who wasn't the bride. In that moment, everything inside me broke and burned at once. My parents sitting in the front row didn't stop her. They didn't even flinch. And as I stood there, trying to decide if I should scream or cry, I realized I wasn't the only one ready to explode. My husband saw it too. And when he finally took the microphone later that night, nobody could have predicted what would happen next. Weddings are supposed to be about love, about unity, about the beautiful moment where two people promise forever in front of everyone they care about. That was what I dreamed of, what I planned for, what I thought my family would honor. But sometimes, family isn't the blessing we expect. It can be the biggest test of all. My sister and I had always had a complicated relationship. She was the golden child in my parents' eyes, the one who could do no wrong. I had spent most of my life feeling like I was living in her shadow, and when my wedding day finally came, I thought maybe, for once, it would be about me. But as soon as she stepped into that venue in white, all those old wounds ripped open. I remember the pit in my stomach, the way my cheeks burned as I forced a smile for my guests. I wanted so badly to ignore it, to focus on marrying the love of my life. But every glance, every whisper reminded me that my moment was being stolen. And what hurt even more was seeing my parents sitting there, smiling, as if this wasn't a betrayal happening right in front of them. But here's the thing. Life has a way of surprising us, especially when we think everything is falling apart. My husband, the man I had just promised my future to, refused to let me suffer in silence. When he took the microphone during the reception, the entire room froze. What he said next changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone in that room. So, if you want to hear how one wedding turned into a battlefield of loyalty, betrayal, and an unforgettable truth, make sure you stay until the very end. And before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this deserve to be told, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The morning of my wedding should have been filled with calm excitement, with little bursts of laughter and tears of joy as I prepared to marry the man I loved. Instead, there was a strange tension in the air that I couldn't quite explain. My bridesmaids were fluttering around me, adjusting my veil, checking my makeup, and keeping me hydrated. But beneath all their chatter, I felt this strange undercurrent. It was almost as if the universe was whispering that something wasn't going to go as planned. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself it was just nerves, that every bride feels a little unsteady before she takes such a big step. As I sat in front of the mirror, I looked at myself carefully. My dress was everything I had ever dreamed of. Lace sleeves, a flowing skirt, and delicate beading that shimmered with every movement. For once in my life, I truly felt like I was the center of attention, and I wanted to hold on to that feeling. My mom came in briefly, gave me a quick compliment, and left almost as quickly as she had arrived. I remember thinking how odd it was, how distant she seemed, but I convinced myself she was just busy with guests. The hours leading up to the ceremony passed quickly, yet with every passing minute, I noticed my bridesmaids exchanging looks. They whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward me and then away as if they were hiding something. I asked once or twice if everything was okay, and they smiled too widely, answering in rehearsed tones. My stomach tightened. I hated secrets, and I could sense one floating just beyond my reach. But I told myself, not today, Annie. Don't ruin this day with paranoia. By the time the photographer came in for the bridal portraits, I felt a little lighter. My friends were telling jokes, and we posed with champagne glasses in our hands, trying to capture memories of joy. I laughed, maybe too loudly, but it helped cover the unease gnawing inside me. And then, almost without realizing, it was time to head toward the ceremony. My heart was racing, but in the best way. I was minutes away from walking toward the man I loved, the man who made me feel seen in ways no one else in my family ever had. The guests were already seated when I peeked through the curtain before my grand entrance. I spotted familiar faces, college friends, co-workers, cousins, and I smiled, my nerves easing a little. Then my eyes landed on the front row where my parents sat. They looked calm, almost too calm, and for some reason, I felt no warmth from their gaze. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself they were just emotional. Still, that unease returned, crawling under my skin like a warning I didn't want to hear. The music began, and one by one the bridesmaids walked down the aisle. Their dresses in soft lavender swayed as they moved gracefully, everything looking picture-perfect. I held onto my bouquet tightly, waiting for my cue, when suddenly the murmurs began. At first, I thought it was just the normal excitement of a wedding crowd, but then it grew louder, sharper, almost like gasps mixed with confusion. I froze, clutching the fabric of my dress, my chest tightening. Something was wrong. I stepped forward slightly, just enough to peek out, and that's when I saw her. My sister. She wasn't supposed to be part of the ceremony. She wasn't in lavender like the bridesmaids. No, she had chosen white. Not just white, but a gown that looked so much like a wedding dress it could have been designed for this very moment. My knees nearly buckled as the reality hit me. My sister had decided to wear a wedding dress to my wedding. The room was buzzing now. Guests turned to each other, whispering furiously, eyes darting between me and her. I felt heat rush to my face, my entire body trembling. For a split second, I wanted to run, to disappear, to escape this cruel spotlight. But then, the music swelled again, and the coordinator motioned for me to begin walking, as if nothing was wrong. Nothing was wrong? My sister was standing there in white, practically playing the role of a second bride. How could I just walk through that? My parents didn't move. They didn't shake their heads or gesture for her to leave. They didn't even look ashamed. Instead, my mom smiled faintly, and my dad sat back with his arms crossed, almost as if they had expected this, almost as if they approved. That realization stung more than anything else. It wasn't just my sister stealing my moment. It was my parents allowing it to happen. As I finally took my first step onto the aisle, my eyes met my husband's. He was standing there, waiting, his face a mix of love and fury. His eyes weren't on me at first. They were on her. The muscle in his jaw twitched, his grip on the bouquet he held for me so tight that the flowers bent. And in that moment, I knew he wasn't going to let this slide. He wasn't going to let me stand there alone in this humiliation. Something was building inside him, and though I couldn't predict how, I sensed he was preparing to fight for me. And as I walked forward, each step heavy with anger and heartbreak, I realized this day was no longer just about vows and promises. It was about a battle that had silently existed for years, one that was finally being dragged out into the open. And I had no idea just how explosive it was about to become, especially once my husband found his voice. The air inside the church was thick, almost suffocating, as I began my slow walk down the aisle. Every step felt like dragging a heavy stone tied to my ankles, and though the music played beautifully, it sounded distant, hollow, like it belonged to someone else's wedding. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the man waiting for me at the altar, because if I let myself look too long at my sister, I knew the tears would spill. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. Not today. Not on my day. My bouquet trembled in my hands as I clutched it tightly. I forced a smile, the kind brides are supposed to wear when all eyes are on them. But behind that smile, my thoughts were spiraling. I could hear the whispers of my guests, their disbelief carried through the pews like a current I couldn't control. Why is she wearing that? Did Annie know? How could her parents allow this? The questions were painted across their faces, even if they never spoke them aloud. Each murmur pierced my skin like tiny needles, reminding me that the spectacle wasn't me, it was her. When I finally reached the altar, my husband-to-be took my hand in his. His grip was firm, almost protective, and when I looked into his eyes, I saw both fury and tenderness. He leaned slightly closer and whispered so softly only I could hear, "Ignore her. This is ours." For a moment, my lungs filled with air again. I wanted to believe him, wanted to let his strength shield me from the chaos just a few feet behind me. But even as his words calmed me, I couldn't shake the image of my sister standing there smugly, her white dress glowing under the lights. The officiant began speaking, his voice warm and steady, trying to guide us into the sanctity of marriage. I focused on his words, clinging to them like a lifeline. "Today we celebrate the union of two souls," he began, and I told myself that nothing else mattered, that the day would still be perfect if I chose to block out the noise. My husband's thumb brushed against my palm, a small gesture of reassurance that nearly broke me with gratitude. He was here. He was mine. And that, above all, was what mattered. But even as vows were spoken and laughter rippled at small anecdotes, my sister remained a shadow looming over every moment. I could feel her gaze burning into my back, and I imagined her thinking she belonged there, as if she had some right to share the stage with me. Each time the photographer moved, I worried about the photos, that her dress would ruin them, that one day my children would look at the pictures and ask why there were two brides. The thought twisted my stomach into knots, and for the first time, I hated that a camera was documenting everything. When it came time for me to say my vows, I almost faltered. My voice shook as I looked into my husband's eyes, trying to steady myself. "I promise to love you, to fight for you, to choose you every day," I began, but my throat tightened. The words tasted bittersweet, because in that moment, I wasn't just promising him love. I was silently begging the universe to protect us from the poison of my family. My husband squeezed my hand, encouraging me to keep going, and I did, pushing through the lump in my throat until I reached the end. The guests clapped softly, their faces softened with emotion, but I couldn't ignore the flicker of satisfaction on my sister's lips. Then it was his turn. My husband's vows were powerful, filled with love and honesty, but beneath the poetry, there was steel. He spoke of protecting me, of standing by me no matter what storms came our way. His words weren't just about marriage. They were a promise to shield me from the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Every sentence he spoke made me feel safer, but also heightened my awareness that he had noticed everything. He wasn't blind to the betrayal. He was storing it, letting it build, and I could sense it simmering beneath the surface. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and as we shared our first kiss, the room erupted in applause. For a brief moment, joy rushed through me like a wave, drowning out the whispers, the judgment, the white dress glowing at the edge of my vision. I clung to that kiss, desperate to freeze it in time. It was the one part of the ceremony untouched by her intrusion, the one memory I could hold as purely ours. We turned to face our guests as husband and wife, walking back down the aisle together, his arm strong around mine. The smiles, the cheers, the rose petals tossed in the air. It all looked perfect on the surface. But inside, I was unraveling. My sister followed us out, her dress dragging along as though she were mocking me with every step. My parents walked beside her, proud, as if they had orchestrated the entire spectacle. And though I tried to smile for the cameras, deep down, I knew the real storm hadn't even started yet. The ceremony was only the beginning. The reception would be the battleground. And as I stole a glance at my new husband, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing with unspoken words, I realized he was no longer content to simply stand by. He was waiting for his moment, and when it came, he was going to make sure everyone in that room knew the truth. The reception hall was decorated like a dream, twinkling lights strung across the ceiling, flowers overflowing from every centerpiece, and a soft glow that was supposed to feel magical. But for me, the moment I stepped inside, it felt like a stage set for a drama I never auditioned for. Guests were laughing, clinking glasses, and congratulating us. But behind every polite smile, I saw curiosity. Their eyes would linger just a second too long, sliding from me to my sister, who had no shame as she walked confidently around in her white gown, collecting attention like it was hers to claim. I tried my best to play the role of a glowing bride, I thanked relatives, posed for pictures, and accepted compliments. But each time I looked at her, bitterness clawed deeper into me. She laughed loudly, tossing her hair, standing in corners where everyone could see her. People whispered as she passed by, some shaking their heads, others smirking knowingly, as if this was exactly the kind of spectacle she had always wanted. My heart sank when I realized she wasn't embarrassed. She was reveling in it. Dinner was served, and I sat at the head table beside my new husband. He looked calm, maybe too calm, his eyes scanning the room like a soldier mapping out a battlefield. He laughed politely when spoken to, but every so often, his gaze flickered toward my sister with a sharpness that made me shiver. I knew that look. It was the look he gave when he had already made up his mind about something. I leaned toward him and whispered, "Please, just ignore her. Don't let her win." He kissed my hand gently, but his silence told me everything. I wasn't going to be able to control him. As the music played and glasses clinked, my parents moved easily among the guests, smiling as if the evening was perfect. Each time they passed by me, I searched their faces for guilt, for even a flicker of regret. But there was nothing. They didn't avoid her, didn't try to downplay her presence. Instead, my mother touched her arm fondly, and my father raised a glass to her once as though he were proud. I felt sick, realizing they were complicit in this, maybe even supportive of it. My family had chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. The toasts began. My maid of honor stood first, her voice trembling but sweet, recalling college memories and the way she had watched my love story unfold. Her words brought a tear to my eye, reminding me of why we were here. For a few minutes, I allowed myself to breathe, to believe this reception could still hold joy. Guests laughed, clapped, and cheered, the room warming with genuine affection. But the moment she sat down, I saw my sister rise from her seat, wineglass in hand, her white dress catching the spotlight as if she were daring the world to watch. A hush spread across the room as she cleared her throat. "Well," she began, her tone dripping with false innocence, "I couldn't let this day pass without saying something about my sister." My stomach dropped. This wasn't planned. No one had asked her to speak. Yet here she was, standing tall, ready to make herself the center of the evening. She rambled about our childhood, about how I had always looked up to her, her smile widening as she delivered each carefully chosen word. I felt the blood drain from my face. She wasn't giving a toast. She was performing, making sure everyone remembered her, not me. My husband's jaw tightened with every sentence she spoke. His hand tapped against the table, restless, his eyes narrowing as if each word was another offense added to a growing list. I prayed silently that she would finish quickly, that she would sit down before he snapped. But of course she didn't. She dragged it out, savoring the moment, her voice carrying with practiced confidence. When she finally raised her glass and said, "To Annie and her husband, may you find even half the happiness I know I deserve," the room gasped softly. My chest clenched in humiliation. She had turned my toast into her own proclamation. The applause was polite but awkward, scattered claps filling the silence that followed. I wanted to disappear, to crawl under the table and hide from the stares. My sister sat down with a smirk, sipping her wine like she had accomplished something grand. I forced a smile, pretending it hadn't cut me to pieces, but my husband didn't bother hiding his expression. He looked furious, his eyes locked on her as if he could burn her dress off her body with his glare alone. The music started again, light and cheerful, but the atmosphere had shifted. Guests avoided eye contact with me, unsure of what to say, as if they had witnessed a wound being opened and didn't know how to react. My bridesmaids whispered among themselves, their faces tight with anger, but none of them dared confront her. I sat there frozen, holding onto my husband's arm, trying to anchor myself before I crumbled completely. But even as I fought to maintain composure, I knew something had shifted inside him too. Because when the next toast was announced, he didn't wait for the microphone to be formally passed to him. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, commanding silence without a single word. And as he reached for the mic, his eyes never left my sister. My heart pounded in my chest, and I realized, with both dread and anticipation, that he wasn't going to let this night end quietly. The room fell into silence as my husband rose to his feet. His chair scraped against the polished floor, the sound sharp enough to make heads turn before he even touched the microphone. He stood tall, shoulders squared, his hand gripping the mic with a steady firmness that radiated authority. At first, his voice was calm, smooth even, as he thanked the guests for being there, for sharing in what he called the most important day of our lives. For a moment, it almost sounded like a typical groom's speech, and I wondered if maybe I had been wrong, if maybe he was going to let the storm pass. But then his eyes locked on mine, and I saw the fire burning there. His tone shifted, subtle at first, but sharp enough to make my stomach twist. "Marriage," he said, "is about love, loyalty, and respect. It's about celebrating two people, not competing with them. It's about showing up for the ones we care about in ways that lift them higher, not drag them down." His words echoed through the hall, and I noticed people leaning forward, sensing the weight behind them. He paused, scanning the room, his gaze landing on my sister. "Unfortunately," he continued, his voice stronger now, "not everyone understands that. Some people think weddings are an opportunity to make themselves the star, even if it means humiliating the person they should be supporting." A ripple of gasps spread across the crowd, heads turning toward her. She froze in her seat, wine glass halfway to her lips, her smirk faltering for the first time that evening. My chest tightened. I hadn't expected him to call her out so directly. He didn't stop there. "And what's worse," he said, his jaw tightening, "is when those who should love us unconditionally stand by and let it happen. When parents allow one child to overshadow another on her wedding day, when they smile at cruelty instead of standing up for their daughter, that isn't love. That's betrayal." The hall grew painfully quiet. Even the music had stopped, the DJ frozen in place, eyes wide. My parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, my mother's hand clutching her clutch bag like it might save her from the truth being laid bare. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him back before things escalated further, but I couldn't move. Part of me was terrified, but another part felt an overwhelming wave of relief. For years I had swallowed the unfairness, the favoritism, the way my parents always put my sister above me. And now, in front of everyone, my husband was refusing to let it continue. He was saying everything I had wanted to scream, but never could. Tears welled in my eyes, not from shame this time, but from gratitude. My sister finally spoke, her voice sharp, cutting through the tension. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, standing from her seat. "You're embarrassing yourself." But my husband didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on her, his voice steady and unshaken. "No," he replied firmly. "I'm protecting my wife, something you and her parents should have done from the very beginning. Today is about Annie. It's about us. And the fact that you chose to come here dressed as a bride, to turn her wedding into your stage, says more about you than I ever could." Gasps filled the room again, and I watched as guests exchanged wide-eyed glances. Some nodded, murmuring agreement under their breath, while others simply stared, caught in the spectacle unfolding before them. My sister's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. My father finally stood, placing a hand on her arm as if to calm her, but even he looked shaken, his usual stoic expression cracked with unease. My husband lowered his tone slightly, but the power behind his words never faded. "Annie deserves joy today. She deserves love, respect, and celebration, not to feel like she's competing for the spotlight at her own wedding. I will not allow anyone, not even family, to take that from her." He turned then, looking at me with such intensity that my breath caught. "You are my everything," he said softly, but loud enough for the microphone to carry his words. "And I promise you, from this day forward, no one will ever dim your light again." The hall erupted, not with awkward claps this time, but with genuine applause. Some guests even stood, cheering and whistling, as if they had been waiting for someone to say what everyone was thinking. My sister sat back down hard, her face twisted in rage and humiliation, while my mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes. For the first time in my life, I felt like the room was truly on my side. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't overshadowed. I was seen, and it was because the man I married had chosen to fight for me. As the applause died down, my husband handed the microphone back to the DJ with a calmness that seemed almost surreal after the storm he had unleashed. He returned to his seat beside me, slipping his hand into mine, and for the first time that day, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. But even in that peace, I knew this wasn't over. My family wouldn't take this lightly. My sister's glare promised retaliation, and my parents' silence screamed of unspoken battles still to come. And as I leaned into my husband's shoulder, my heart both racing and steady at once, I realized the rest of the night would decide more than just how people remembered my wedding. It would decide the future of my family ties, the fractures that might never be mended, and the strength of the new life we were building together. The applause eventually faded, leaving behind an uneasy silence that hung over the reception like smoke after a fire. Guests shifted in their seats, unsure of whether to continue celebrating or to sit in stunned quiet. The music tried to resume, the DJ forcing a cheerful playlist back into the air, but the energy in the room had changed. My husband sat beside me, calm but watchful, his hand never leaving mine. Meanwhile, my sister glared at him across the room, her jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles in her face twitching. She looked less like someone embarrassed and more like someone planning her next move. I forced myself to smile, to mingle, to greet relatives who offered hesitant congratulations. Many of them whispered words of support when they leaned in close. "He was right," one aunt murmured. "You deserve better than what they've put you through." A cousin squeezed my hand and whispered, "Finally, someone said it." Their words soothed me, but they also cut deep because it confirmed what I had always known, that people saw the favoritism, the cruelty, but nobody had ever dared to speak it aloud until now. At our table, my parents sat stiffly, their plates untouched. My mother refused to look in my direction, her eyes fixed on her drink. My father, usually composed, looked like a man who had been stripped of control. His face was flushed, his expression hard, but he didn't speak. I wondered if he was furious at my husband for daring to challenge their authority, or if he was silently ashamed. Either way, the silence between us spoke louder than words ever could. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a daughter sitting beneath their shadow. I felt like an outsider staring in. Eventually, my sister stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She marched over to our table, her white dress swaying dramatically as if she wanted every eye in the room on her. "You had no right," she hissed, leaning across the table toward my husband. "This was uncalled for. You ruined everything." He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He simply met her glare with steady eyes and said, "No, I protected her. And if you can't see that, then maybe you don't belong in her life anymore." Her mouth fell open, her fury momentarily silenced by the weight of his words. I expected her to shout, to cause a scene, but instead she turned her fire on me. "Do you even realize what he just did?" she snapped. "He humiliated our parents, he humiliated me, and you're just sitting there, letting him?" Her voice cracked, revealing something underneath her anger, a desperation I hadn't noticed before. For years, she had been the golden child, adored and defended no matter what. But now, in this room, her pedestal had crumbled. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel inferior. I felt pity. The rest of the evening was a blur of awkward dances, half-hearted laughter, and guests sneaking glances at us as though they were watching a play unfold. Some tried to revive the celebration, clinking glasses and urging us to kiss, but the tension was unshakable. Every time my parents walked by, the air grew colder, their silence a wall I couldn't climb. My sister disappeared midway through the evening, storming out without a goodbye, her dress dragging across the floor like a ghost leaving the stage. A part of me felt relief, but another part felt a heavy finality, as if her exit wasn't just from the wedding, but from my life. Later, as the night wound down and the crowd thinned, I found myself alone with my parents for the first time. The room was quieter, filled only with the clinking of staff cleaning up glasses. My father finally spoke, his voice low and sharp. "You've allowed him to disrespect us in front of everyone. Do you understand the damage he's done?" My chest tightened, but before I could answer, my mother cut in. "We raised you better than this. she said coldly. Family comes first. Always. I stared at her, stunned. Family, I whispered. You call this family? Standing by while she tried to take my wedding day from me? My voice cracked, but I held their gaze. They didn't answer. They didn't defend themselves. Their silence was confirmation of everything my husband had exposed. And in that silence, I felt something inside me break and heal at the same time. I realized I had spent my whole life trying to earn their love, trying to compete in a race that was rigged against me. But I wasn't running anymore. I had someone who chose me without conditions, who stood for me even when my own blood did not. For the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I felt like a woman standing on her own. When we finally left the venue, the night air was cool against my skin, carrying away the heaviness of the room behind us. My husband wrapped his jacket around my shoulders, his arms steady around me as if to shield me from the world. We walked in silence for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding, with the unspoken truth that everything had changed. He leaned close and whispered, "You don't need them anymore. You have me, and that's enough." I looked up at him, tears stinging my eyes, and for once, I believed it. I believed that family isn't always the people who raise you, or the ones who share your blood. Sometimes, family is the person who stands by you when no one else will. And as I stepped into the car that would take us toward our new life together, I knew I was leaving more than just a wedding behind. I was leaving the chains of my past. Still, even as the car pulled away, I couldn't help but wonder what would come next. Would my parents ever call? Would my sister try to force her way back into my life? Or had the line been drawn too deeply in the sand to ever be crossed again? When I look back on my wedding day, it's not just the flowers, the dress, or even the vows that come to mind. It's the fire that was lit inside me. A fire that started in anger, in betrayal, but transformed into something stronger: clarity. For so long, I had tried to be the daughter who earned her parents' approval, the sister who never complained, the woman who tolerated being overlooked. But that night forced me to face a truth I had avoided for years. Sometimes, the people we call family aren't the ones who lift us higher. They're the ones who hold us down. I won't lie to you and pretend it was easy. Watching my sister arrive in white, watching my parents smile as though nothing was wrong, it broke something inside me. It was a wound I didn't know how to close in the moment. But then my husband stood, and in front of everyone he said what I had been too afraid to say. He defended me. He protected me. And in that moment, I realized what it truly means to be loved. Love isn't quiet acceptance of pain. Love is courage. Love is choosing someone so completely that you'll stand against anyone who tries to harm them, even their own blood. That night didn't just change the way I see my family. It changed the way I see myself. I stopped being the girl who begged for attention, the daughter desperate to be chosen, the sister who quietly endured being overshadowed. I became a woman who understood her worth. And that's something I wish for anyone listening right now. Never let someone convince you that you're less than what you are. Never let toxic people decide the value of your happiness. Of course, the story doesn't end neatly. My parents and I barely speak now, and my sister hasn't reached out since that day. Sometimes, I wonder if we'll ever rebuild those bridges, or if they were meant to burn. But I also know this: I no longer feel empty, waiting for them to see me. I have someone who sees me every single day, who fights for me without hesitation. And that is more family than I ever had before. So, if you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love you most, I want you to know you're not alone. Pain like that can shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to choose peace over chaos. And you are absolutely allowed to walk away from those who refuse to honor your worth. Thank you for sitting with me through this story, for listening to the raw, messy truth of my wedding day. It wasn't perfect, but maybe it was exactly what I needed. A moment that stripped away the illusions and left only what truly mattered: love, loyalty, respect, and the strength to choose a new path. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own relationships, or even if it simply reminded you of the power of standing up for yourself, then I want to ask you for something. Please subscribe to this channel. Not just because it helps us grow, but because stories like this deserve to be shared. Somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that they're not alone in their pain, that they can rise above it, and that family isn't always about blood. It's about love. And together we can keep telling those stories.